More and more as this day's debate has developed, it turned itself into a battle for what some of the anti-marketeers obviously see as the true socialist heart of the Labour Party. Mr Wilson himself had deliberately ignored detailed party polemics in his speech, and indeed he'd been very careful to keep narrow party arguments out of it altogether. He saw it all in a national and a world context. But as the debate developed, the insistence that you couldn't be a true socialist and be in the market came back again and again from other delegates, and of course it was just as strongly rejected by pro-Marketeers. Mr Wilson himself had been at pains to see the whole thing in a national context. There were the warnings about the problems that we face as a nation now, irrespective of whether we were in or out, and the careful review of Labour's history to show that the party had traditionally been in favour of joining. The party's promises of renegotiations had never been just a stage setting behind which to conduct a retreat from Europe.
The moment has now arrived when each of us has to decide, and still more important, when each member of the electorate has to decide, whether our objectives for renegotiation have been adequately achieved or not. It is the substantial majority view of the Cabinet that they have been met. But no less sincere and valued colleagues of the Cabinet take the opposite view, and by an unprecedented, unique Cabinet decision have been given freedom to express that view in the campaign in the country.
The Labour Party's National Executive's attack on the continued membership was launched by Mr Brian Stanley of the Post Office Engineers, and it was he who introduced the argument about sovereignty and specific condemnation of the market as a conservative, capitalist organisation.
It's our belief that the Tory terms, even as amended by the renegotiations, are extremely harmful to Britain. They will become even more so the longer we stay in the market. And it's also our belief that these terms, and indeed the basic nature of the treaties themselves, will in practice represent an effective deadweight on the development of democratic socialism in Britain. They may not make our task impossible, but they will place yet one more obstacle along our road.
Mr Stanley taunted the British Commissioner to the Markets, Sir Christopher Soames, as the Billy Bunter of Brussels, and got a retort in a speech from the Foreign Secretary, Mr Callaghan, which fought back persuasively at some of the strongest anti-marketeers.
All right, Soames wants to stay to turn it into a capitalist organisation. Our European socialist comrades want us there in order to turn it into a socialist organisation. And the point I want to leave, and the thought I'd like to leave with conference is this, that we can make, the peoples of Europe can make of the community what they will. Whether the community becomes a capitalist organisation, a friend of the multinationals, or whether it becomes a democratic socialist Europe, in which at this moment, and no sneers please, Labour parties are taking part in 6 out of the 9 governments, whether it becomes one or the other depends upon our will.
Mr Eric Heffer, the Labour minister who was sacked by Mr Wilson because he insisted on speaking in the Commons against the market, he stuck to his argument again today that joining the market inevitably meant loss of sovereignty.
If we hand it entirely over to the bureaucrats in Brussels, we're undermining our own heritage, and that is not a nationalist argument, that is an internationalist argument, because socialism, political democracy go together.
But earlier, Mr Roy Jenkins, the Home Secretary and leader of the country's Stay In campaign, had argued diametrically against that.
I cannot regard the preservation of sovereignty as the ark of the covenant of socialism. You can argue about who you want to pool it with. Well, there are no available alternatives in the world, certainly not in the Commonwealth. But I do not believe that it is either socialist or realistic to think that you can cling to sovereignty in the world of today.
And so to the rest of the many, many times rehearsed arguments. The anti-marketeers said we'd lose control of our industry. The pro-marketeers said that we wouldn't. Naturally, too, the food argument was very much the fore. The pro-marketeers said that there wasn't any cheap food left anywhere. But their argument, the argument of the little Europeans over the food policy, was, said Mr Michael Foot in the final speech of this conference, nonsense.
Jim Callaghan said this afternoon that one of the causes of the high prices throughout the world, pushing up the prices even higher in some respects than they were in the common market for a period, was the failure of one or two harvests in Russia and elsewhere. Quite true. But they're not going to have failed harvests every year, you know, Jim. They're not going to have failed harvests every year. And if, therefore, they're not going to have failed harvests every year, maybe that supplies the answer to Jim's question of where he would be able to get some of the cheaper food. And indeed, the answer to that question is also in the document which has been distributed by the National Executive to everybody's seat, and you will see there a description of how, in fact, it may be possible in the years to come that we will have a wider choice if only we decided to retain our previous connections as to how we could buy food throughout the world.
And so on, the great names and the powerful men following each other into the limelight. But how did it all appear to the unknown names, to the people from the constituency parties?
The dilemma of the common market for this party is clearly posed in my own constituency party. By 3 votes, they sent me, a professed anti-marketeer, to this conference. At the next meeting, they went round the universities and got out a few of the theoreticians, the abstract ideologists, and committed me to come here and vote for Europe.
I am in the situation of being in reverse, which just shows how stupid the whole situation is. My party voted to come out of the market by 2 votes, but it voted for me on the same night, not another night, as the delegates, by 3 votes against the other side. On top of that, my party didn't mandate me. So what do I do now?